let an established rock club let a high school football player behind their supposedly very expensive soundboard.
How things went wrong, and boy did they go wrong. Ready? Rollin'. Hey, how y'all doing? It's Chey, and today we're going to be going over my book wrap-up for the month of January. We started off strong this month, not as strong as I may have would have liked, but January and December are usually kind of slower months for me in the sort of reading slump, seasonal depression, you know, sort of things. Yay! This month I read 8 books total, which is already 11% of my 75 book goal for this year. I decided I'm going to do these wrap-ups a little differently. Instead of just hoarding all the books until the end of the month and reviewing them, I'm going to try and record the review as soon as or very close after I finish the book while the thoughts are still fresh in my mind. That being said, I'm recording this intro as I'm recording the last books that I read this month. So when you see me with brown hair in these next few clips, it's because they were recorded before this one and the last reviews you're going to see. We have Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. Like pretty much almost every other booktuber I've watched, I absolutely adored this book. It's a sapphic romance with, I would say, grumpy ex-sunshine. Super easy to read, super accessible. Part of what interested me about this book and what I ended up enjoying almost, I would probably say the most, is the illustration of family and friend dynamics. I wouldn't say they're extremely complex, but they are well and deep-rooted and explored and realistic. Individuals are taken into account, there are problems, obviously there are bad histories. These problems aren't just mentioned as plot dump or as info dump. They are things that rear their heads time and time again. They are topics and subjects that come up and take root in this story and affect the relationships. I would say the book is character heavy, character development heavy. I think it's a really well done exercise in character development. It does a great job at exploring the concept of broken family, broken people in more ways than one. The first book I read this month was Suncatcher by Jose Pimienta. This is an absolutely gorgeous graphic novel. It's set in Mexicali. It follows a girl who, after the death of her grandfather, basically is chasing the perfect song that he never finished. She's trying to finish the song itself. It explores her relationships and finding new friends, starting a band, them trying to get the band off the ground, being a perfectionist, putting yourself into your work to the point where it's obsessive and isolating, and how the creative experience can be a very, very cruel mistress, along with the importance of relationship ties to ground you to what's important. I love this book. It really hit home for me, as well as the artwork is gorgeous. Look at this. This book really hit home for me as both a music lover and a creative who is a little bit too hard on myself, a little bit too much of a perfectionist in chasing things. This book is easily accessible and I think very, very important. I'd recommend this to anyone to read, but especially I would recommend it to middle schoolers and high schoolers that are now more than ever pressured to find their place in this world. As an audio engineer, I will say this book made me very, very, very happy because clearly he is in touch with the music scene and people in the music scene. I know a lot of research went into this book, and I can tell. The little details that are added into the scene, such as the mixing board or the way that the mic cables are wrapped around the stands, the way the people hold mics. Every little detail, every panel has such heart and soul and attention paid to it. I think it's a great portrait of the Mexicali scene. I think it's a great portrait of creativity and growing up and responsibility. It's also a great portrait of, I think, love in general and how love bleeds into so much of what we do, whether it's our personal relationships or just our creative endeavors, and how that connection between personal love and personal passion can lead us to our true purpose. 5 out of 5 stars. Absolutely adore it. Pick it up. Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. I started this during my swapping my screen time with reading video, and I only got 90 pages into it, but I just finished it up the other day. I enjoyed it. Not as much as I would have maybe expected for all the hype and praise I've heard around this book. It wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad book, just not my thing. I enjoyed the writing style a lot more than I enjoyed the story. It follows the problems with the family legacy, the complications of family trauma, family legacy. I am reading a lot of books lately about family trauma. What is it? Maybe I do need to go back to therapy. This book mostly follows along the story of Macon Dead, who is the son of another Macon dead. It follows Macon trying to find his way in this world that seems to want to take the only life that he has from them, whether taking up his own personal time, deciding his life for him, taking agency for himself, taking accountability, finding out where he fits in this complicated family saga, what it means to him, and what it means to him to be in the world. What I really did enjoy was the writing. I thought Toni Morrison's writing was absolutely gorgeous. I love her descriptions of individuals, not only in just their typical characterizations, but in how they develop in reacting to things and how those reactions and emotions play on them as individuals and then influence later interactions or situations. But as a girl that has grown up in the backwoods of the backwoods, my favorite writing was not in her descriptions of characters, but in her descriptions of the backwoods, because hardly anyone gets the terror of the woods right. But horror games about the woods, terror video games, or movies or media about the woods so often get wrong about what is scary about the wilderness. Like, yes, of course, there's like danger in animals and all that kind of stuff. That is only a part of the terror that I would say. And by reading what she says in here, she gets it. Now, the land itself, the only one they knew and knew intimately, began to terrify them. The sun was blazing down. The air was sweet. But every leaf that the wind lifted, every rustle of a pheasant hen in a clump of ryegrass, sent needles of fear through their veins. The cardinals, the gray squirrels, the garden snakes, the butterflies, the groundhogs and rabbits, all the affectionate things that had peopled their lives ever since they were born, became ominous signs of a presence that was searching for them, following them. Even the river's babbling sounded like the call of a liquid throat waiting, just waiting for them. That was in the daylight. How much more terrible was the night. The plot didn't blow me away, but the writing did. Another book I read this month was All Good People Here by Ashley Flowers. This book is a thriller murder mystery drama. It centers around a small town that was rocked to its core by the unsolved murder of a little girl of one of the prominent families. This crime has gone unsolved, has been totally cold for the past 20 years, and then suddenly another case happens not too far away that seems all too similar to the first one. Even though they're 20 years apart, the similarities are all too glaring to ignore. Enter Margot. She has a personal stake in this because it was actually her childhood best friend who was the victim in the first case. Over the years growing up, Margot has become a journalist, and one of her life obsessions has been to solve the cold case of her best friend and bring the killer to justice. So when this other case happens, she is one of the first to notice the similarities, and this book follows her trying to connect the dots in the cases, see if they are connected, and bring the killer or criminals to justice, as well as bring to light what truly happened to these girls. I think this book was easily readable. I think it was believable. That's probably the thing I enjoyed most about this book. Olivia mentioned this in her vlog, which I'll link if I can remember which vlog it was. But Olivia mentioned about the small town politics that is written in here, about how accurate it is, and Lord have mercy, it is so true. All of it is dead on accurate. Wow, that was an unintended pun. Dead on in this book. I felt right at home. I felt like I was reading about my own hometown. It was from talking about how to dress on Sunday at church to talking about how you were seen if you weren't at church on Sunday. I would recommend this for an easy, not quite cozy, but for an easier thriller if you just want something to just have a good time, pick your brain a little bit, a nice little murder mystery to sit down with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. I'd recommend this one. Okay, hi, now we're back to Present Chey. Super Fake Love Song by David Yoon. I really like this book. Really cute, really sweet. I think it gives an important message. That message being, especially when you're young, you have no idea who you are, and that's okay. And oftentimes we find ourselves lying to not only ourselves, but to everyone around us about who we really are for fear of not being able to fit in, not being accepted. It's less scary than actually putting yourself out there. Some of the humor in it wasn't for me. It focuses a little bit on body humor, which is just not my style. Not super gross body humor or anything, but just, it never even resonated with me when I was younger, so maybe it's an age thing, maybe it's just a type of humor thing. But that was the only little thing that I didn't like about this book. Otherwise, I found it engaging, I found it accessible. It was a lovely time. I had a lovely time with this book is the easiest way to say it. This book basically centers around a kid named Sunny Day who's a super mega nerd, D&D, LARPing, lovable nerd. One day, this really pretty girl moves in down the road and her family is friends with his family. To say the least, she ends up thinking that he's in a band, and then he has to go on this whole charade with his friends, making this fake band, living out this lie to her, in order to keep building this reputation with her around this fake persona that he accidentally presented to her, and he thinks that she really digs. Like I said, it does really well in the complex themes of, especially when you're younger, about feeling out who you are and feeling okay about it, not only internally, but showcasing it externally, and how that can become complicated with people that you trust, all the pressures that can come from the outside, or even closer inside with your family. I think this would be a good book for anyone to read. Like I said, it's just a fun, lovely little time, but especially I think it would be prevalent for kids in middle school or even high school to read. The one little niche gripe I have with this book, David Yoon, is how Gunnar, the football player, suddenly becomes a sound engineer out of the blue with absolutely no explanation. That, as an audio engineer, I'm a little confused by, a little concerned by, a little frustrated by. Sunny Day and his band are at practice, and in the story, Gunnar somehow just jumps behind the soundboard and starts running sound for them, and then later, when they're performing, he all of a sudden jumps behind the soundboard again with no explanation, with no prior description of how he learned how to do this or what prior experience he has. And it talks about he's setting their gains, telling them where to use microphones, telling them where to place things, telling them what levels they're at. How does he know how to do that? How does he know how to jump behind a soundboard at this huge club in LA and just know all the inputs and outputs and know the gain and know how to place things to get the certain sound that he wants? How does he know that? How does he know? You can't just jump behind a soundboard and know that. Yes, you can figure it out, but this is his second time doing it, according to this book, because we get no prior experience beforehand.
Also, why would an established rock club let a high school football player behind their supposedly very expensive soundboard? Why is their mix engineer, why is their front of house engineer or their monitor engineer not there? Why are they letting a high schooler behind that probably several $1,000 board?
I don't understand. I don't understand it. As an engineer, it gives me anxiety to even think about if a talent show were to come into our venue and a high schooler who has run a soundboard once in a music room at band practice were to jump behind that board and to start messing with my inputs and my outputs and my settings. It just gives me anxiety. I need answers. I just came in on my day off to drop off some supplies. What is that random teenager doing standing behind my multi-$1,000 soundboard? I go to the high school having their talent show here. I'm gonna be running live sound for my friend's band and the entire talent show. Wait, you're gonna be running sound for the entire talent show? Have you ever been behind a soundboard before? Have you ever been a live engineer before? Yeah. Oh, phew. Okay. Once. Once? For a band rehearsal. In the music room after school. A few days ago. You're telling me for your second time ever doing this, you're going to run an entire talent show with a setup you know nothing about on a board that you've never been behind before or seen. Yeah, but don't worry, I already got all their gain set, got all the EQ dialed in, and I even taught them how to space out the mics to avoid that whole proximity effect. How do you know how to do all that? How do you know? You know what? Whatever. It's fine. But so help me, Lemmy, if you screw up my local IOs, I will end you. It's really good. You should read it. Now we need to talk about Ernest, because Ernest, we have things to talk about. Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. I know Ernest Hemingway can be sort of divisive for his writing style, because it is so blunt and just straightforward a lot of the times. All the time, actually. But I quite like it. I have only ever read Ernest Hemingway's, short stories and snippets of his work. This is the first actual novel or full-fledged Hemingway work I've ever read. And look at this cover. I know I always talk about my covers, but this is a Scribner's Son edition from 1969 I picked up at a used bookstore. Look how gorgeous that is. As for the words inside, they are as equally beautiful to me. I've been wanting to pick this up and read it for a long time, but it was because Emmy Reeds had this book for her book club of the month that finally incentivized me to pick it up and read it alongside her. I'm so glad I did. I don't know why it has taken me this long, because I thoroughly enjoyed it. I agree with what a lot of Emmy said. I'll link her review either in the cards or in the description. I agree with a lot of what she said about not getting too attached to any particular character, but the ending absolutely devastated me. It hit me like a Mack truck. The last 4 or 5 pages, especially the last 2, are just a dive into a concrete well face first. And I think it goes to say something for his writing that even if you don't get particularly attached to the characters, he can still affect you that strongly emotionally. Page 151. And surrounding Hemingway's writing, I know there's some debate back and forth whether people like his descriptions or not. I also go back and forth myself on that. I personally like his sensory, I guess is the word, descriptions better than his physical descriptions, like the way he describes smells or the auras of places. Something about the way he writes his sensory descriptions just activates the specific sensory memory part of my brain, and I think him more so than any other writer, I can put myself there. I can sense exactly what he's talking about. I sat back in the carriage and waited for her. It was raining and I could smell the wet street and the horse steaming in the rain. A wine shop was open and I went in for some coffee. It smelled of early morning, of swept dust, spoons and coffee glasses, and the wet circles left by wine glasses. I don't know, just something so simple about it makes it very beautiful and also relatable to my brain. I don't know. I like it. Part of this book is so devastating emotionally because it's sort of autobiographical. It's about a man, the protagonist named Henry, who's an American who joins up to serve as an Italian ambulance driver with the Italian army in World War I. If you didn't know this about Ernest Hemingway, that's exactly what he did. Therefore, his descriptions of war, the pain it causes, comes from a place of authenticity, along with his descriptions of the battles and the gore and all the hardships themselves. The emotional rawness that he is able to pack in this book with such a punch without being overzealous is amazing. Part of the reason that it packs such a punch is because in comparison to his very blunt and to-the-point writing style, it just seems like a drop off the deep end. Because you're walking along in this story being like, oh, the houses were gray and bare and wet, and then all of a sudden he just hits you with, if people bring so much courage to this world, the world has to kill them to break them, so of course it kills them. The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places. But those that will not break, it kills. It kills the very good, and the very gentle, and the very brave impartially. If you are none of these, you can be sure it will kill you too, but there will be no special hurry. By the way, I did not mark in this book, but the previous owner did, and that was one of the lines that they annotated. Really enjoyed this. It devastated me in the best way. And if you're looking for a classic that's really easy to read, addictive to read in a sense, if you need a writing style that really captures your attention and just sucks you in and you can just flip page over page over page without getting lost in the sauce, I recommend Hemingway. Do not recommend this if you don't want to be emotionally devastated. But overall, do recommend it. This next one I don't really have much to say about. It's The Mystery of Agatha Christie, an intimate biography of the First Lady of Crime by Gwen Robbins. I picked this book out of a pile of free books outside of McKay's. They had like a little bin where I guess books that McKay's didn't want to buy as used books you could just toss in and they were free. I have never read an Agatha Christie. I had them read to me as a child. What I remember about them is that they were good and I liked them, but do not ask me any details. I cannot recall them. But I do want to read them. I just thought this might be a little fun biography to start off the year with someone that I have an interest in reading her work. Why not learn a little bit about her background, her life, maybe what inspired her novels? It wasn't mind-blowing. I mean, it was fine. It was a biography. It was really well researched, but almost to the point, at some points where it seemed almost invasive. It seems like this was written very shortly after Agatha Christie's death, and the way the author talks about trying to get in touch with members of her family and her husband just seems a little inconsiderate. I think I would have enjoyed it much more if I cared more about Agatha Christie. That sounds mean to Agatha. I don't mean to be mean to you. I don't know you. It did make me excited to actually pick up her books and read them though, now that I have a background of which to frame them against certain points and times in her life. Something else, I oddly feel attacked by this book because I relate to Miss Agatha Christie way too much, to the point where I'm sort of scared. Chey, how do you relate to Agatha Christie, you mean? Well, number one, I love writing like she does. I love the art form, I love the craft of it, I love it for what it is. I write all of the time. Now you're like, Chey, that's not much to go on. Listen here. Listen, 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 listen. Her second husband, she met because he's an archaeologist who was in the Middle East, who loved Egypt and the Middle East, and he was a great big archaeologist, and she was out there on digs, and they bonded over their love of digging up artifacts and ancient civilizations. Guess what my partner is studying? That's right, archaeology. He is studying archaeology because we're both big nerds about the rocks, we love the Mummy, we both want to be Rick O'Connell and Evie at the same time. You got an archaeologist, you got a writer girl. Also, when she was in her elderly age, she broke her hip and did not know it for a week because she just walked around thinking it was badly bruised. Guess who broke their foot and didn't know it for 2 weeks because she also thought that it was just badly bruised or she pulled a muscle? Me, baby. Me. Me and Agatha, I relate to her. I also ignore my injuries for weeks on end because my pain tolerance is superhumanly high. I have a partner who loves digging up rocks and digging in the dirt, and I also like discovering poisons and crime. I feel like we're the same person. I relate. I get it. I get it. And the last book we're going to sum this up with that I literally just finished a couple hours ago, April Blood, Florence and the Plot Against the Medicis by Laura Martinez. This book has been on my shelf for almost a decade. One of my weirdly specific interests that I have had for a very long time, ever since I can remember, since I was a kid, is Leonardo da Vinci and the Medici, specifically the Medici family around Leonardo da Vinci. Of course, wrapped up in that point is the April Plot, or the Medici Massacre, or the Pazzi Conspiracy to take out the ruling Medici family members in Florence, Italy at that time. This is one of the only books that I could find about a decade ago when high school Chey was really trying to delve into it and learn more about it. This was one of the only books that I could find, and it was out of print. Then I went to DC for the first time, went to an out-of-print and rare bookshop, had 5 minutes to go into this bookstore. I am not kidding you. Walked into this bookstore, looked up, and it was the first book I saw on the shelf. So I snatched it out, bought it, ran back to the bus. She lived happily ever after. Why have I waited so long to read this book? Honestly, because it intimidated me. I knew it was going to be full of names, full of places, full of dates, full of connections, and I really wanted to get the most out of this book that I could because it is a subject that still interests me to this day. Not just because of who it involves, but because of the socio-political, economic ramifications that it had afterwards that, honestly, if you think about it far enough, we're still kind of feeling today. But recently I started watching Allison Pages, who has probably quickly become my favorite booktuber, and she was saying about reading nonfiction books to pick up what you can, pocket what you love, and remember there's no quiz at the end. That absolutely changed the way that I looked at reading nonfiction, and I snatched this up. I almost said swiped, snatch. I snatched it up and started reading it. If you don't know, to sum it up, the Medicis were a super powerful family in Renaissance Florence, and Lorenzo de' Medici was basically de facto almost Prince of Florence, not officially a prince, but he ran it sort of like a prince. Super famous banking family, very, very powerful family, and the Pazzis, another old banking super powerful family, did not like that, and they resolved to take out Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano and take back the city for themselves and, well, not for themselves, for the Republic, and give it back to the people. This book not only details the conspiracy itself, how it formed, the people involved, it also goes into the details of that day, how things went wrong, and boy did they go wrong, and then the ramifications afterwards. I found it really fascinating, it satisfied me and my curious little brain, and it also gave me a lot more rabbit holes to go digging down into. This book is so well researched and so academic that I would not tell you to read it unless you were interested in the subject, because you will probably get bogged down and intimidated. That being said, I also encourage you to give it a try because it is such a fascinating moment in history that had such wide, far-reaching ramifications. A lot of what happened surrounding the conspiracy is still, to this day, a mystery. I mean, it did happen 600 years ago. A lot of records have been lost, but that's part of what makes it so fascinating, is that we're still finding out new information about those involved and why they were involved and what really happened that day. I think the author does a great job at compressing it all into this book. Like I said, I found a billion other little rabbit holes for me to dive down, but condensing it into this book, I think he did the absolute best he could, and he did a very good job at making it succinct and making it digestible for those that want to know and learn about the subject. The author does a really good job at also not nobilizing the Medicis, because they should not be nobilized or idolized, but also not nobilizing or idolizing the Pazzi family either. He does a great job at showing faults all around as well as good things on each side of the fence. Because, as the author says, history is more complex than we often like it to be, and too often it is way too easy to side with either the victors on the side of history or simply the underdogs, when the truth in itself is much more nuanced. And there you have it. There are the 8 books that I read this month. I did not have any stinkers. I liked all of these books. They were all very good. And I'm even more excited for next month. Let me know if you've read any of these books in the comments, if you found any of them interesting, if you're going to pick any of them up. I'd love to know, love to hear from you, love to chat with you about them. Especially if you're interested in the Medicis. How come almost no one I know seems to know about this except for me and my history nerd friends? Stop, Chey. Stop. The history nerd is coming out. If you want to see more of my book reviews, book vlogs, all that booky goodness, I have a whole books playlist just for you. As for now, though, if you haven't heard it from anyone else today, I love you. Love and peace.